She ran barefoot down a rural New Mexico road with a metal collar locked around her neck and chains biting into her wrists. It was early morning outside Truth or Consequences, and the pavement was cold under her feet. She was exhausted, drugged, and terrified that every passing second might end with someone dragging her back into the darkness she had escaped. When a driver finally slowed and stopped, he saw the padlock, the bruising around her neck, and the panic in her eyes. He wrapped her in a jacket, called police, and stayed until help arrived. That call in March of 1999 exposed the crimes of David Parker Ray, a 60-year-old mechanic who lived quietly in southern New Mexico. He fixed equipment, hauled scrap, and blended into the rural routines of the area. To neighbors, he was unremarkable and reliable. Detectives soon learned that behind that routine, Ray had constructed a deliberate system of captivity meant to dominate victims physically and psychologically over extended periods of time. Police followed the survivor's account to a trailer on Ray's property. From the outside, it appeared cluttered but ordinary. Inside, investigators found restraints bolted into walls and floors, chains, cuffs, and devices intended to confine bodies for long durations. Chemicals consistent with sedatives were recovered, along with syringes and drug paraphernalia. The condition and layout of the trailer suggested repetition and planning, not impulsive violence. One piece of evidence immediately set the case apart. Investigators located an audio recording Ray played for captives. The voice was calm, rehearsed, and instructional. It explained what would be done, how resistance would be punished, and how total control would be maintained. The recording mattered because it demonstrated intent. This was not confusion or loss of control. It was a process designed to be repeated. Ray's method relied on isolation and vulnerability. Victims were encountered at moments when help, rides, or protection could be offered. Once under his control, drugs were used to disorient memory and weaken resistance. Victims were restrained, deprived of sleep, and kept uncertain of time. Fear came not only from pain, but from never knowing when it would end or whether anyone outside knew where they were. The investigation quickly widened beyond Ray alone. Cindy Hendy, a close associate, was arrested and charged as an accomplice. Detectives believed she helped lure victims and assisted in maintaining control. Ray's daughter, Glenda Jean Ray, was later charged as well, accused of participating in aspects of the confinement. Evidence suggested that others were aware of the abuse and failed to intervene. Investigators then faced the most difficult question: how many victims were there? Rumors about Ray had circulated for years, but proving homicide required names, bodies, and evidence that could withstand court scrutiny. Detectives searched property, interviewed witnesses, and attempted to match seized photographs and recordings to missing persons reports. Some survivors may have been too drugged or traumatized to clearly identify him. Others may never have survived at all. Ray's background offered context. As a mechanic and equipment operator, he understood hardware, restraints, and structural stress. Neighbors described him as capable and unremarkable. Inside the trailer, everything pointed to routine rather than experimentation, suggesting that the abuse had occurred repeatedly over many years. After the escape, police acted quickly. They documented the survivor's injuries, secured the trailer, and seized evidence before it could be destroyed. Ray and Hendy were arrested. Ray minimized his actions, while Hendy's statements shifted over time. Physical evidence and survivor testimony anchored the prosecution's case. Prosecutors focused on what could be proven. In 2001, Ray pleaded guilty to kidnapping and torture related to at least one victim. Hendy was convicted for her role and received a lengthy prison sentence. The outcome acknowledged severe crimes but left many questions unresolved. In 2002, before additional trials could proceed, David Parker Ray died of natural causes while in custody. With his death, The possibility of full confessions or further evidence vanished. Any remaining secrets died with him. Law enforcement later acknowledged how close the case came to remaining hidden. Victims were often isolated individuals, some struggling financially or emotionally, making disappearances less likely to trigger immediate searches. Trauma and drugging fractured memory, which in earlier years could have led authorities to dismiss early accounts. Search efforts extended into remote desert areas Ray had accessed through his work. Time and terrain complicated recovery. For families of missing persons, the arrests reopened wounds without always providing answers. Investigators involved in the case later described the emotional toll of reviewing evidence that was clinical in language, but severe in impact. Assignments were rotated to reduce burnout, yet many carried unanswered questions long after the case closed. Even after Ray's death, investigators continued to evaluate tips and re-examine seized materials, hoping to connect names to what had been uncovered. Each lead represented a chance for answers, though many ended without resolution. The crimes associated with David Parker Ray are remembered not because every answer was found, but because one act of escape disrupted years of hidden abuse. The record that remains is one of calculated control that depended on secrecy to persist. The case remains a stark example of how opportunity, coercion, and disbelief can intersect, allowing extreme harm to continue undetected for years. Medical experts later testified about the effects of prolonged restraint, drugging, and sensory deprivation, explaining how memory can fragment while core events remain intact. For investigators, the case reshaped how prolonged captivity crimes were approached and reinforced the importance of believing survivors even when their stories emerged under extreme stress. Despite convictions, the full scope of Ray's actions remains unresolved. Without confessions or recoverable remains, many suspected victims remain unidentified. Investigators have acknowledged that some individuals connected to the case may never be named, and some families may never receive confirmation of what happened to their loved ones. The lack of closure continues to weigh heavily on those left behind. The case also influenced how law enforcement agencies across the country approach reports of prolonged captivity and psychological coercion. Training materials began emphasizing that fragmented memories and delayed disclosures are common in victims who have been drugged or held under extreme control. Officers were encouraged to document physical evidence carefully and to avoid dismissing accounts that did not follow a linear narrative. For the community surrounding truth or consequences, the revelations were deeply unsettling. Ordinary routines were re-examined, and long-forgotten moments of discomfort or suspicion took on new meaning. The idea that extreme violence could exist alongside normal daily life left a lasting mark on the area and on those who had crossed paths with Ray without ever knowing what he was doing behind closed doors. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.